of the United States, which more or less becomes a facilitator given the strategic interests of the United States in the region. My worry and my concern is that the values of the United States that have been proclaimed by President Obama and amplified by Secretary Clinton.
The rhetoric of values.
The rhetoric of that has been very positive and persuading. However, the strategic thrust of the United States in the region still maintains Israel as a pivot. And in that sense, it is important that to fulfill the total anxiety and the total renaissance of this great revolution in Egypt is that somehow or the other, Egypt has to retrieve its deterrent power against the Israeli expansion and aggression.
Here's where the trick is, Rashid, is that the United States is trying to maintain a close relationship with the Egyptian army. So my question to you is the following. The demonstrations might be calling for replacing President Mubarak, the person, but in fact, will there be serious change on the long term unless the Mubarak regime is changed?
The question is, will there continue to be a police state apparatus in Egypt that determines outcomes when this movement has succeeded or when this movement has come to its peak?
But would you trust the regime today to lead the transitional movement?
I'm not in Egypt. I'm not an Egyptian. It's up to the Egyptians to decide that. But this is my concern. It's not so much the army, and it's not even so much Egypt's foreign policy at this stage. It's whether the police state apparatus will be tamed in the way it was in Tunis. Every single governor in Tunisia has been fired. Most of the police commanders have been fired. A general from the army, actually an admiral, has taken over the Ministry of the Interior. That is a step that has to take place in Egypt if it is to be free.
So the army has to be, and the security forces need to be taken out of the political system.
In the first instance, the security forces have to be removed from the political equation.
Well, hence the vice president too, Mr. Omar Suleiman.
Well,
the prime minister and many other
and
cabinet.
A whole bunch of,
and that's why I think many people in Egypt have very, very little credibility in a future that simply has Mubarak removed. In other words, the fear is a Mubarak regime without Mubarak, and that's certainly not going to be good for democracy. Now, we have heard promises for decades, and some of the same language, in fact.
From some of the same people.
From some of the same people, this idea of a national dialogue and so on, reaching out to the opposition. This was Safwat al-Sharif's discourse in the 1990s. It is clearly demonstrated that many of the people who have been appointed, the vice president, the prime minister, and so on, are deeply entwined in this regime for decades. So there would have to be major.
Interrupt you. The person who was in charge of the Egyptian security apparatus, in charge of torture, in charge of the secret police, is now the vice president. If that regime stays in place, there will be no democracy and there will be no change. It's not a matter of the man Mubarak or even the man Omar Suleiman.
Completely.
It is that secret police apparatus running things in Egypt or not.
And hence...
that is what changed in Tunis.
Yes.
That was the key thing that changed in Tunis.
And hence, to broaden the picture a bit and take it to the rest of the region, what's going to happen in Egypt, of course, as a model, is going to have a huge influence on what goes on in the rest of the region. So I ask you, just generally, who's next? What's going to happen next in the Middle East?
It's not the question of only next. It is that Egypt's weight has been totally paralyzed by the former regime, and particularly not only by corruption, not only by dictatorship, but also by the fact that it has removed its national role on the Arab scale.
So you think now that the rise of Egypt is possible? You think that will lead to the domino effect in the region?
Of course, it would have a dominant effect.
Or domino effect?
Well, dominant effect, but domino not yet. Of course, we can see signs in Yemen, we can see signs in Jordan.
People speaking of Pakistan, Ambassador, now.
You know, the most important thing, the test ultimately, is that internal democratization and distribution of wealth from those who have monopolized wealth. That's on the one hand. Second is its role in the Arab world. its role on the Palestinian question.
Ambassador, you think the test will be for them to lift the siege of Gaza, for example?
Yes, to lift the, yes, one, and also to realize that the Palestinian Authority, which supported and solidarized with Mr. Abbas, with
With Mubarak.
Mubarak, I think that was a moment of clarifying what is the ultimate substance of the satellitization of the West Bank.
So
And
being
I
a
think
client of a client of a client now in the Arab world is
and
probably
I
over.
think, I think that that is the role that Egypt has to resume by remobilizing the resistance culture.
Hence, it can no longer be a client of a foreign power.
Never. I think it should never be a client. It should be friendly, and should be resume its role as a guiding force in our foreign policy.
We must, as we wind up the show, we must broaden the picture to the rest of the region.
That's right.
It's clear that if politics is perception, and to a large degree in the Arab world it is, it's breathtaking, the speed of change. So if we've moved 6 weeks from a man setting himself on fire to a country, a regime is being brought down, certainly this is going to move forward into the rest of the Arab world, no?
Well, I mean, this is a regional system, right? People have to remember that these aren't simply states that border each other, that the Arab world is a regional system with common language, common history. So we've already seen this tsunami spread, whether it's a domino effect or not, as we can talk about. I think that some countries are much more susceptible to potential significant change and so on than others. I mean, Yemen clearly and Algeria. I think that it is less likely, although not impossible, that certain countries in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and so on, will face a similar kind of fate. But those are different political systems with different political structures.
And as I said earlier, now,
different
the countries like Pakistan, a country of 100 and etc., some million, is also now worried because of the similarities. They all suffer, Rashid, from the same ills of corruption, badly run system, autocratic governance, and so on and so forth.
This might have an effect outside the Arab world, but I think the key thing here is that there is an Arab public sphere. The walls that the regimes have erected, and which Arab satellite television and which social media have broken down in some ways, have now been broken politically. People are borrowing methods from one country to another. People are taking inspiration from one country to another, even if this is, heaven forbid, repressed in Egypt, as it may be for a time. Something has changed now. Everybody understands that this is a region that's linked and that everybody has the same aspirations. People are taking heart from what happened in Tunisia and now from what's happening in Egypt, and I think change is beginning all over this region.
So the virus of democracy has spread.
No question.
Well, on this positive note, gentlemen, thank you for joining Empire, and now we'll be back with the last thought. I would like to end on a personal note. For those of us who grew up in the Arab world, life has been one long nightmare shaped by political failures, military defeats, social regress, and economic stagnation. But spring has come early this year. Never have I witnessed such widespread vigor and yearning for change. Yes, the situation remains difficult, but remember, the darkest moments of the night come just before dawn. Call me a romantic. I believe in the words of the Tunisian poet Abdelkader Shabi. If people will to live, providence is destined to favorably respond, and night is destined to fold, and the chains are certain to be broken. That's the way it goes. Until next time.
Home to a diversity of rare species, Latvia's pristine woodlands are a place of magic. But with a strained economy and an eager market, forests are rapidly perishing, and with them their inhabitants. People and Power investigates how 60% of Latvia's timber ends up on UK shelves with a questionable seal of approval. Latvia's pulp fiction, at this time on Al Jazeera.
We do accept that there was very bad mistakes made in our banking area.
Behind the headlines
Most South Koreans are not interested in reunification.
is the inside story, at this time on Al Jazeera.
A popular uprising that shook the country to its core. a defiant president under siege from his people. As the protesters took charge of the streets, we look back at the events that are changing Egypt.
I will stay on the air if I can until the police come.
In a special program, Al Jazeera gives you a day-by-day account from those that witnessed them firsthand. Egypt burning, at this time on Al Jazeera.
In a new series of one-hour documentaries, Al Jazeera English showcases films from across the Al Jazeera